It's great to be here, and it's an honor to be speaking to you all today. Naturally, it's quite a crazy time at the moment with COVID-19 and also the George Floyd situation and the resulting focus on Black and ethnic minority and race issues out of the US. Now, I am an entrepreneur. I've always seen myself, I think, as such. I originally was lucky enough to go to a great university in Cambridge and go to a great school where I got a scholarship and a bursary. So I followed a path of great education, and when I finished, I had what you would consider the typical choices of going into banking, consulting, or accountancy, but none of those things felt that interesting to me. And as an economics student, I was really interested in the wider world, why and how systems worked, and how to potentially disrupt and improve systems and problems at a sort of mass and macro way. As I left university, I ended up joining a consultancy originally, and then the internet boom was happening, and I ended up wanting to go and join this exciting new frontier of the internet, and ended up joining a big sports internet company called Sportal. From there, as boom went to bust, I ended up going to join Hutchison 3G, which became the 3G telecommunications company in the UK 3. It was the biggest startup in corporate history at the time, went from 0 to 1,700 people in a year. When I joined, there were 100 people joining a week. I learned a lot there. I learned a lot at Sportal, and I ended up going and rejoining my old CEO from Sportal to help start up a private jet business in the UK called Marquis Jet. From there, having run strategy, I ended up moving to Warner Brothers and working in film. I ended up managing my friend's band in my spare time and learning a lot about promotion, PR, marketing, and sort of treating that as a company. It was a great side project to learn a lot very, very quickly and cheaply, and without sort of sense of massive risk. And then I think I got to a point in my career where I was sort of wondering what to do next. I felt like I was a strategy guy, a clever guy working for senior management, and I wondered how I could progress my career. And I ended up talking to several people who had done an MBA, and then one of them said, don't think about an MBA. You've had lots of really interesting experiences, so come and join me instead. So I ended up joining her at a gaming company called Inspired Gaming Group, where I ended up doing a big consultancy project to sell some business to a big gaming company. They ended up buying, and then I was given the task of actually then making the theoretical project, which I'd written a huge 100-page Bible on, make that come true. So that was a really intense then experience of trying to take a project from concept through to reality. It was one of the hardest, I think, business times of my career at that point. I was doing 100-hour weeks. It was a product that was broken, trying to fix it on the fly. And somehow, by hook or by crook, I got through that period. I ended up learning how to manage big teams of people, and I took a product from nothing to 70% of the UK market inside 18 months, and then scaling that internationally. And that finally gave me the confidence to know that I could do something myself. And I think I'd always previously thought I was a clever guy behind the real guy. I was the number two, the person who advises, who does all of the sort of background analysis work for the person who then makes the big decisions. But having gone through that experience, I then had the confidence to go out and try and build something for myself. So in 2008, I ended up starting my own fashion technology startup called Metail. It revolved around trying to solve the online clothing fit problem. And it was inspired by my wife. So she wasn't my wife then, she is now, but it was seeing her struggles as she tried to find clothes that would suit and fit in the changing room, and there being no better solution for that online, that I felt that that was something that was interesting enough, big enough, and sort of relatable enough to many, many people, that it was something that I felt that it was something I wanted to go after trying to solve. And then I also met a professor at Cambridge University while I was trying to build up a gaming platform around blackjack and baccarat for casino products. And I wanted to use cameras as they're recognizing cards live in a casino. And I'd been to Macau in off the coast of China to see the casinos there, and I thought, wow, this would be really interesting if I could use cameras to do this. And I didn't know how to do it, but I just at the time went back to my hotel room and I just entered into Google leading experts computer vision, and a professor at Cambridge University popped up first. And I was like, wow, okay. And it had his number, his telephone number. So I did something which I have never done since and had never done previously, and that was to cold call the professor. I got through to him first time. I explained the problem I was trying to solve, and he was intrigued and said, that's absolutely doable, come and visit me. So on returning back to the UK, I then went up to Cambridge University, visited him, ended up commissioning an ex-PhD student of his. And interestingly enough, while I was there, he showed me all of his research work, which included going from photos of Antony Gormley to 3D accurate models. And that was a big aha moment. It was like, wow, this could be the technology that solves this interesting challenge around clothing fit that seemed to be a world first. It seemed to be, this could be the exciting way. This could be the way that I could basically solve that problem. And hence I started on that journey. And that journey was 11 years. I, in the process of building that business, raised in excess of £25 million. So that took the company global. We had customers from Asia, India, Singapore, Hong Kong, Europe, Brazil, the US, and then ended up selling that business in summer of last year to one of the big global clothing manufacturers based out of Hong Kong. And right now I'm focused on positive society and climate related projects. So I fully exited Metail last summer and have been sort of getting involved in lots of very interesting and exciting projects, of which I've got about 12 now on the go. So they go all the way from some philanthropic projects around aspirational attainment in education, through to sitting on the board of a couple of climate change related businesses, one which is a zero carbon monitoring consultancy, another which is around environmental behavioral change. And then I'm also looking at fairness and in terms of access to finance and opportunities for Black and ethnic minority groups. So I've just co-founded a business called Extend Ventures, which is looking to do big research projects into Black and ethnic minority businesses, with a view to leading to positive, impactful change in how these businesses get access to finance, both from government and venture finance and other forms of financing. So it's quite an exciting time, and especially in terms of that narrative, that is really at a heightened stage right now, especially with the disproportionate impact on the Black and ethnic minority communities, certainly here in the UK and the US from COVID-19. and the way in which measures have been put forward to deal with the response that have also not quite shown, I think, the fairness that is well and truly warranted. So that sort of brings me up to date with where I am now. And I think in terms of like my career, I think there are sort of been three key topics that have been a key part of how I've looked to progress and run my businesses. I have a very strong sense of culture and fairness in how businesses are run. I think in terms of when I started Metail, it wasn't just a case of building a business at all costs, but a case of trying to ensure that I built a business that if I was an employee, I would want to work in, and make sure that was always going to be an inspiring, exciting space full of learning and challenge, and one in which treated everybody as human beings. So that was one key axis around my career. Another big learning I had, which I taken to heart, which is a key driver, I think, ultimately for success, is around networking. So, and we can dive into these topics in a bit more detail. But I, am the son of two immigrants into the UK. My father came here from Nigeria, and my mother came here from Norway. So as I started life and then was lucky enough to get a scholarship to a good school, I didn't have the sort of networks that my peers had. So whereas a typical peer could call on Uncle Jack, who was the owner of a car business, to go in there and work there for work experience, or cousin Jim, who was the head of European banking at Morgan Stanley. I had nobody here. I just had my nuclear family, and I didn't have these sort of wide generated opportunities. And so networking for me, certainly at school, felt like a dirty word, if you like. I was quite envious of all of the different connections and connectivities that other people had. And then when I got and moved on to Cambridge, again, there were lots of people there who were extremely well connected. And I felt that I was very much behind in terms of being able to reach the sort of opportunities that other people could get. And I think it wasn't until I then started working at Sportal that I really started to realize that your network is what you make of it. My CEO at Sportal was quite an incredible and charismatic individual. He was the sort of person who would go out to the coffee shop to get a coffee and come back with 4 business cards. And his assistant worked and his network extremely well. So he treated his network almost like a business. He took down the details of everyone that he met. He also ensured that he remembered and took down key details of the particular person. And he operated a pay it forward style way of dealing with everybody in his network. Because he remembered interesting details about everybody, he was always in a position to connect and join dots. So in having a conversation, it would be a case of like, oh, I know Jim, he's the perfect person for you to meet for what you're doing. And those sort of connections were the ones that were then super meaningful. And by doing that in advance for other people, that meant that he was always in a position to ask for favors and connections later down the line. And I think that's something I really learned there, and I took to heart, and I realized that your network is you and your career, and it's all about your reputation for doing good work. It's all about meeting interesting people and remembering things about them, and working your network and keeping it alive. So I've had, I almost feel that I've been lucky enough to have had a career where I've worked at 7 different places with lots of interesting people, and I have kept in contact with people all the way through. And I've kept in contact with a lot of the people I went to school with and at university with, and I keep working those connections and keep connecting people, because I have those memories, and I remember interesting details about people, and I keep my awareness of what people are doing alive. So, for example, in my year group from school, when it was the 500th year anniversary of my school, my year was the most well-attended year in the across all the living year groups of my school, because I'm still well connected with most of my year group. And I think that's that pay it forward mechanism. It sort of often feels like there's nothing tangible and transactional about it. So what's the point? But that karmic motion of what goes around comes around really does, I think, work and pay off in the end. And I certainly have seen and been in situations often where people have helped get me out of a hole from nowhere. So I remember when I was in the bootstrapping stage of Metail, and I really needed to get some consultancy work to keep going, I just put out a note out there to my Facebook community of, does anybody know any work? And an old school friend who I hadn't seen in 12 years just responded straight away saying, yeah, I've got something for you, come in to see me. And straight on trust, a piece of work was dropped in my lap to do, and that got me out of a big hole right at that time. And I think, like, if you start to think about network as something that you build yourself, I think you can move away from the sense of network being about privilege, because I think you can build a network quickly and effectively, and you can reach out to people that you might not know, and not have to overly rely on a sort of slow organic build of a network. I sort of, in terms of my sort of business and working life, if you like, on networking, I ended up having a rule, which I think is a good one, which is in terms of going to networking events, I would allow myself to leave after I'd had 2 good conversations. The truth about networking is nobody really enjoys it. So if you go to an event, by giving yourself some form of parameters and criteria, you can make it work for you in a way that is comfortable. And I always felt that if I could have 2 good conversations, it didn't matter who they were with, but as long as they were interesting, and then that person would remember me and I would remember them. And by interesting, that conversation could be with a member of the bar staff, it could be with anybody in that room. And I think by doing it that way, it allows you to basically focus on who do I get a good vibe from, who do I make eye contact with, and that's the person I'm going to spend time with, rather than, which is often the case with networking, which is why it can feel so pressured, of like, who is the most important person in the room, I have to get to that person. And if you do that, then your conversations often aren't authentic and they aren't real, and there isn't going to be a connection which lasts beyond that initial conversation. So I always say to really focus on just trying to have real connections with people, and they will take you forward. And then certainly I think there's another feature of networking which I found interesting, which Malcolm Gladwell writes about a lot, is that there are these sort of 2 types of connections you'll have when you meet people, and there are connectors and there are mavens. Mavens have real deep knowledge around something, and you will have a very deep relationship with them. But there are often lots of people who are amazingly good and have lots and lots of connections, but you'll never get a really, really deep relationship with them. There'll be people who you would consider to be on the edge of your friendship group, but those people are the key people, because they are the people who jump you out of your own comfort zone network into whole new groups of people. And those connectors are the people that can basically almost transform your ability to be successful, both in the business world and in others. And it's when you hit those spots, it's like it can be dramatic, because they open a whole new world to you that you'd never seen before. And I think that's where, you know, being in a major city, you're quite lucky, because certainly I'm quite lucky, because there are quite a lot of those people around. Whereas I can understand if you're in smaller places, far from the big cities, you know, finding those people who can basically leap you into another network is a way more difficult. Other things that, in terms of like networking, that I've definitely noted over the years, is that you should never be that worried about trying to approach people who you think are interesting and who could be helpful, and approach them in a way that they will basically respond to. I think from my experience, everybody is open to an introduction and having a coffee or having a meeting or having a conversation where the attempt at an introduction is interesting, and shows that the person trying to make the introduction has done a little bit of work to understand a bit about you, and has strong clarity in terms of what they want out of the conversation. So, for example, on LinkedIn, my general rule of thumb is that I never accept a LinkedIn request from anybody I haven't spoken to. But if a person makes an effort to write something that's interesting and has a reason in which for why they want to connect, then I'm always open to that. And there've actually been several times where we've ended up at Metail hiring interns off the back of that. In fact, one lady ended up moving over to the UK from Italy to come and work for us for a whole summer, and that led to a big change in her career and outlook and focus ongoing, where she's now sort of she went back to university and has become an AI guru. So I think you know, don't underestimate your ability to get into, to make a contact with somebody, and think about all the steps and all the reasons why you want to talk to them. And if you can craft something nice, interesting, that stands out from the crowd, I promise you'll be surprised more often than not. So networking, I think there's a lot to demystify it, but it can be hugely rewarding and you can surprise yourself. And I think certainly from my perspective, I love people. So I love meeting new people. And I think if there's one general theme about people, founders and people who are trying to make something happen are the most interesting people. So I never tire of talking to founders and campaigners, because they're hugely passionate about what they do. They're hugely knowledgeable about what they do, and they're trying to make stuff happen. You know, most people in their daily lives don't have as much of that passion or as much agency as they would like to make and try and go for real change. The people who do, and the passion they do, is completely infectious. It's like a drug. So anybody who's in the presence of those people can't fail to be uplifted. So trust in the desire for other people to spend time in that type of environment and with these types of people. So moving on, failure. I think the great thing about startups or working in startups is that you can fail, and that failure is important. So you only really learn from failure, and failure is something which can be openly discussed, openly dealt with, and openly dissected and learnt from. I think the big thing about big companies and government, if you like, is that failure isn't almost allowed. We're really struggling through a major political time right now where it seems impossible for any politician to ever utter the words "I'm sorry," or "that was a mistake," or we will do better next time. Whereas in building a startup, I think one of the key things that differentiates them from other types of businesses is in the ability for startups to spot failure and kill failing projects quickly. I think there is many good ideas in startups and big business and government. It's just that those other types of organizations are overwhelmed by the failing and ideas which clog up and take away and suck away the life out of all of the innovative, smart ideas. And I think, in every job I've had, there have been major moments of failure in terms of product iteration, failure in terms of decisions that we made and how we dealt with things, but all of them have led to something better. And I think the ability to basically spot, learn, understand, and move on is a key feature of whether you can be successful. And I think with Metail, our ability to adapt and learn from failure, I think, was one of our key strengths, because if we hadn't been good at that, we would have died, because there were a lot of certainly in the early days, companies trying to do certain things in the same space as us, but they all died and fell by the wayside, whereas we kept going, we kept pivoting, we kept changing our internal structures, changing and adapting our culture with reference to the size of the business as we went on, and that enabled us to basically keep going and keep taking advantage of new opportunities as and when they arose. And certainly, I think for me, there were definitely business failures, like an initial proposition really for us didn't fly. So it was a virtual fitting room type proposition that we wanted to sell into business, and we got really great early customer traction initially from ASOS, which is one of the big clothing retailers, e-commerce retailers here in the UK. But we were coming out of the credit crisis of 2008, and businesses were struggling, and we would be having conversations with business, and they would quickly determine that they couldn't really invest in new ideas. So it's going to be a similar time to what we're in now, is that everybody then was had fires burning in their business and were desperately trying to do anything to stay alive. So investing in future activity where they didn't know if it was going to be success or failure wasn't, and investing in innovation, speculative innovation, wasn't something that they really wanted to do. And we didn't have a clear means and a clear message of being able to say that we saved a company money. So it wasn't really easy for companies to onboard us. And we ended up working with some big, fast-growing, forward thinking businesses in the UK, but then there weren't enough of them. And I think we would have died quite early on if it hadn't been the fact that we then got inbound traffic from Asia, from Singapore, from India, fast-growing businesses where the leaders were tech-savvy, data-savvy, young, and focused on growing middle-class markets. So that pulled our product into being global very early on, and because we built the business to be global, we were able to take advantage of it, and we were lucky from that perspective. And I think, again, we were able to be nimble to take advantage of that opportunity, whereas we could very easily not have been in a position to do that. And I think through hard work and being nimble and being able to spot things that aren't working and quickly try and adapt, you increase your potential for lucky things to happen to you. And I think that's important. So you want to be able to handle failure to ensure that lucky things can happen to you. You also want to, from a networking standpoint, put yourself out there and be where your customers are and be where people are, so that lucky meetings can happen to you. And then also, as a culture, you want to have a culture where everybody works for each other and everybody cares for each other, and everybody believes that you're all in it together, such that when the difficult and bad times happen, you can come together and ensure that you can take advantage of lucky moments. So, as I can keep going, I think I've just seen a question which sort of links to that point, which is, how do you keep yourself positive when you keep hitting failures or challenges? Like, that's one of the hard things, I think. So as a founder, you are there to be the chief optimism officer, which is something I used to like to call it. So you are there to be positive always, right? Positive for the team, to keep everyone up. But there's nobody who does that for you, right? So how is it that you then are resilient enough to keep through and go through failures and difficult moments? I had some very difficult moments. There were 3 times, I think, in the time of Metail where we were running out of money, big time, and there were a couple of moments where I felt I didn't know where we were going to find funding from to keep going. And in fact, on 2 occasions, the day the money arrived, we had minus money in the bank, and had it gone on another week, we would have been dead. And I think, over time, you build resilience from overcoming each challenge as you go. But at the same time, in terms of positivity, I think you've got to keep challenging yourself and keep evaluating whether what you're doing matters, and whether what you're doing has real impact, and whether there is a market for it. So, product market fit, you have to constantly try to be true to yourself as to whether you're doing works, whether it solves a real problem, and whether people actually really want it. And I think there are moments where that underlying belief basically gets you through difficult times and through failures, and knowing that you've got a good and great team behind you is a key part of that. I was lucky enough to have a great team working for me all the way through, and I think to this day that my biggest achievement was putting that team together. It was a humbling experience for me, and I think the sort of key feature of a great culture and a great working environment is going to work with other colleagues who inspire you every day. Like, that for me was what was exciting, and having that team behind me made me almost often feel invincible. And I think that was the bit that got us through a lot of the difficult times. Like, there was one moment, for example, when we were about to launch our first launch partner with Tesco, and I was getting married at the same time. I was getting married in February. Our launch date was gradually heading towards my wedding date, and we've got everything ready, everything was there, and the key stakeholder at Tesco said, "Oh, your technology is recommending me a size 12 in this dress. I'm a size 10. all confidence drained out of the team. And my team came back from that meeting and said, look, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We had an agonizing evening discussions, and then we decided, because we had every size of that dress, actually. We'd spent the time, we tested round and round and round. So to her credit, we said, look, can you try them on? We've got every size. So the next day we took them in, she tried them on, and thankfully she said, I stand corrected, in this dress I'm a size 12. Whew. Launched back on. And that night I had even had to talk to my now wife and say, look, I'm not sure whether we are going to be able to go away for a honeymoon because we've got crisis. And thankfully we did get to go away, and I spent the launch day at 4 a.m. on the side of a volcano, standing outside of an office block, sponging off their Wi-Fi connection to connect with the team and make sure that everything had gone well. Another question: how do you manage to keep yourself motivated? In the really early days, it's super hard as you start to build something, because certainly for me, when I was in a previous role, I was in a role where I had constant inbound work all the time, constant response to stimuli. And then when you start something yourself, you are creating work. Everything is off the back of what you do. So you will send out emails and you're waiting for replies, and then a day will go past and nothing happens. 2 days will go past, nothing happens. You're twiddling your thumbs, and then everything, you know, in your mind, everything is like not happening. It's terrible. You're in this roller coaster ride. You're in the trough, and then an email comes in, and suddenly you're like, oh, everything's great again. They're interested, and you're back on the way up. And a key part is trying to basically understand that it's going to be this ride, and figure out things that you can be doing in the meantime to keep your spirits up. Like for me, certainly in the early days, it was like I needed to make sure that I was going to see people, making connections, having a reason to get out and about and do things that kept a sense of like progress going, and constantly monitoring progress. Like where are we at today? Where are we trying to get to? How close are we? Like setting targets is important from that sense of progress. It's really hard otherwise to see whether you're progressing or not, and being able to see progress is key. And now, having come out of Metail, an exercise I did, which I would recommend, is that the same way in which you drive that for your own business, like I set myself like, what's my mission? What am I out to do? And then what are my values? So I have, I'm interested in positive society, climate related projects. And then I have a set of values around how I live and what I want to try and achieve. And therefore every project that comes my way, I evaluate them on that basis. Like, do they move the needle for my values? Do they satisfy the values that I have? And I think with a business, you do something similar from a cultural standpoint. You set out your mission. What are you trying to achieve? What's your vision for the future? What's your mission? And what are your values? And values are so important in terms of hooking everyone together. And by setting that mission, that North Star, you're saying, right, that's where we're going. And that's what you sell down to the people who come and work for you. It's like, guys, we're going here. And then on a value standpoint, it's like, this is how we're going to go there. These are the things that are important for us about how we do that journey. And for us at Metail, the way that in which we established our values, it was by asking 3 basic questions. Like, what motivates you in life? Let's start with that. What motivates you in life? Ask yourself that really like big question. And often when I did that with my leadership team, they actually were quite surprised, because money never came up as a motivation. And even my CFO was like, oh, I thought money would be the thing, but it isn't. So what motivates you in life? And then it's like, what motivates you about the company that you're trying to build? And then the final one is, what do you want to have achieved when your time in that company is over? Those are 3 core questions. And I think the way in which we then came up with our company values for Metail was that actually our values were the overlay, in the Venn diagram, that middle part where it was the same across all different groups of people. And that's what we're all about. That's what we're all about. So, you know, and I think that is where you spend that time at your core, understanding what really motivates you, and then monitoring and evaluating what you're doing as a business to make sure that it's still achieving that. And I think for me with Metail at the end, we were still 5 years ahead of the industry. And I got to this sense that the industry wasn't going to catch up. So it felt like the right time to sell the business, because I want to have, and I'm driven by positive impact. And it felt like we were just cruising and I wasn't going to be learning anymore. And we weren't in a position to have big impact. And that moment to sort of become that sort of big standalone company driving the industry wasn't going to happen. So the industry hadn't caught up. So the best way for me to sort of reconnect with my mission, underlying mission, was to sell that business and look at new opportunities. So another question. It's a daunting time for new entrepreneurs. What would be your advice to people getting started now? I think that the sort of, if there's a good thing, the good thing about starting a business in a down period is that it's very clarifying and it helps to sharpen what is and isn't important. So if you can start a business and you, in a downturn and in a really tough time like this, it's because your business matters, like, because the decisions that are being made by buyers of any type of product or service or organization response, they are making those decisions because it's a key priority for them. And therefore, if your business idea connects to that key priority, then it's like you're in the top 3. So in boom times, businesses have the ability to basically do lots of things, and they can be frivolous and they can try things out. But in tough times like this, they can only do the things that are important. And I think for you, as you basically set up and sort of hone your value propositions around what it is that you're trying to deliver, it can really help sharpen and make sure that you really shrink the proposition down to what's really important, and you get rid of the fluff, like the 80-20. Like so many people end up like putting all sorts of features onto products and initiatives that are just not important and people don't care about, and they don't spend the time really understanding what it is that the customer cares about and delivering that and only that. And I think that's what's good about a moment like this, is that it can separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. All of the nonsense businesses disappear and the key ones remain. So if you can grow a business out of this, you will be hugely successful as things start to grow again and the economy starts to grow. So I think in these moments, it's time, if you're thinking about ideas, or you've got an idea which you're trying to grow, is to really sort of like think hard about what's important and how, both in terms of the business and in terms of the value proposition, and what customers really, really care about, and how to align your messaging and your product propositioning to fit that. So, okay. Please keep the questions coming. Happy to take as many as possible. Talking more about culture, I think in the early days, certainly of starting Metail, you can get away with culture essentially being the cult of the CEO. So everything you do becomes culture, the way in which you act, the way in which you do work, etc. But as you grow, you end up having to define things and codify them more clearly. because not everybody's as close to you as they were. So I found in growing Metail that there were some key stages where we had to do a lot of work to restructure the company and change things, because we had huge growing pains and difficulties. And it was like, the first stage was like 0 to 8 people. Everybody's working together. You don't need, everybody's in the same meetings. You don't really need much structure at all. When we were from 8 to 16, suddenly there are people not involved in meetings and people feel left out. And you get sort of some like people related problems that happen off the back of that. And you start needing to put in structures around meetings. You need to start to have some form of hierarchy, the clarity of what people are doing. And then the next phase after that is, and then once you put those structures in, things get harmonious again and things can grow. And then the next stage after that is around about 35 to 40 people. Then you get breakages again. And at that moment, you start having to put in really like more intense structures, because you go from being used to delivering messages and instructions in a top-down fashion to needing teams to communicate more in a cross-team function. So you need teams to be able to communicate with that and then basically communicate back up again to different layers. So that becomes really difficult. So you have to keep changing the structure. And in the times when you haven't changed the structure, you get a huge amount of tension and lots of difficulties and people complaints and stuff. And sometimes people will think, oh, stuff's not going well, stuff's not going right. 2 + 2 is suddenly 3. And we would always be in the process of working on the next stage of structure. We'd implement the structure. And then by the time we'd implemented it, within 6 months, it was already out of date. And then you have to go again. So you're constantly working to try and keep up. And I think one of the things certainly I didn't anticipate or realize when I started Metail was how much time I was going to be spending on people and being an agony aunt over nearly everything else. Like all of the biggest problems and the headaches and the big taking of your mind share was all around people related issues. So that, but I think I'm fortunate enough. I think I do have a good sense of empathy and emotional intelligence, so I can see and spot things in ways that other people couldn't. So I'd walk into a room and I'd say, oh, that person's seems to be in a bad mood. I wonder why that is. And you talk to their boss and they hadn't seen it and they're in the same room. So like understanding and how to work that and make the working environment work and hum is key. And I think right at the end was one of those sort of almost sad moments where I felt that the team was working at its best and the most productive and most efficient and most harmonious right at the moment that sold and ended my time with my baby. So another question, what are my future ambitions and goals? I think I definitely have the urge to run something again. I'm currently involved in 12 different projects, but none of them I'm directly really leading. I definitely have the energy to build something, but I think it needs to be big and it needs to be bold. That sort of early bit, I want to do the later scaling bit, I think, more. I also have a massive sense of civic duty, I think. I think certainly in this period of COVID-19, I think we have a duty to rebuild the world economy back better and ensure that we develop a new social contract that is more equitable and delivers progress rather than the potential risk of all of the initiatives and measures to save and rebuild the economy actually moving towards increased inequality. So I would say that the recovery from the banking crisis 2008 has made inequality worse. We can't afford to come out of this crisis in a similar way. So I'm really keen on trying to work out and establish a new sort of blueprint for a new kind of welfare state that delivers better outcomes. And I hope that if there's any silver lining out of this crisis is that the people are aware and more attuned to there needing to be a better way of running economies and a better way of living that is more in tune with the world, from a climate perspective, an environment perspective, a social perspective, and a society perspective.
We've got 2 minutes before we officially close. I just wanted to pass it over to you in case there's any kind of closing thoughts or closing comments you wanted to make.
Yeah, I'll just say sort of like, practice what I preach. So if you want to reach out to me, please do. You can find me on LinkedIn, Tom Adeyoola. Just tell me a bit about yourself. Tell me what you're trying to do and achieve, and I'll see what I can do to help. I mean, I think, 6 degrees of freedom, I think you could probably get to most people in just 2. Right. So, and that's the way I try and think of it. It's like I'm 2 steps removed from anyone in the world. And then with a bit of persistence and determination, you can get there. You can find anyone who can help you achieve your goals and ambitions.
And Tom, you mentioned a Malcolm Gladwell book, I think, where he talks about some of what you covered. Which book is it, just so that people
that's the tipping point. And in terms of like on the cultural side and motivation and getting through hard times, The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz is a great read. So it's a collection of essays on founder stories and getting through difficult times. It's brilliant. I recommend it to every founder.